Welcome, dear students. This session focuses on divergent development in modern English. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would be able to understand and you would have a realization of the divergent spread of English in today's world, and you would also be able to understand what issues come along. Well, my dear students, the development of so many varieties of English that have taken place what I would say horizontally, over space. It has spread across the globe. The natural result is that there are certain problems with reference to, pronunciation, with reference to spellings, with reference to grammar, etc. And there are certain controversies about language use and usage both. When it comes to controversies, especially, the issue is with reference to the former British colonies who became independent in the second half of the 20th century. Of course, with independence came the issue of what would be the status of English now in these countries. Whether English should be retained as an official language or not was a huge socio-political issue of almost all of these countries. This led to the question, if English is retained as an official language, whether to teach English, that is the standard British English, or the local varieties of English. And of course, this was a very, very tricky question. Various factors have played a part in these arguments. There were, of course, certain patriotic feelings, nationalistic feelings, and attachment to the traditional culture that gave rise to a kind of, opposition to the use of English. However, desire for advances in science and technology and the conflicting needs for the local and international communication gave, support to the idea of continuing the use of English. In fact, there are many cross currents that we can notice on the issue. During British colonial rule, standard British English was the language of administration, of local, law and government and governance. And the local departures from it were stigmatized as errors. The variety that local people would create would be considered to be wrong English. So, for example, you can take the case of India, or you can take the case of Pakistan for that matter as well. When it comes to India, there was this north part of India that was supporting the use of English, making Hindi as the official language, but the south wanted Dravidian languages as the, as the main languages of the country. And of course, the reasons were economic and social as well as political. In all this situation, English was yet another agent that was to be dealt with, and, a mastery of English was considered to be a privilege of the elite class. Those forces who were more radical and more democratic, they wanted replacement, by one or more local languages. However, the controversy has, I would say, not yet been settled even today in many of these areas. Take, for example, the case of Pakistan. The result is that there has been a huge impact on the educational policies of these countries, where, there would be constant switches between, local languages and English as the medium of instruction. And this keeps on going on. It happens, even today. In today's world, if we look at our own educational policies and language policies, we would realize same is the case in Pakistan, where still it is quite debatable whether English should be used as a medium of education or Urdu should be used. Anyways, given the numerous varieties of English in today's world, it is impossible, that there won't be any differences. Of course, there are differences in terms of phonology, grammar, and vocabulary. It is not possible here to give all the examples of all these varieties or to explore all those areas. I would just give a few examples from selected areas to give you an idea of how this divergent spread across the globe of this language has led towards, variety within English. Focusing on phonology, for instance, different varieties of English can differ phonologically in three main ways. First, their phonological systems can differ. For example, the inventory of phonemes may differ. Secondly, the realization of those phonemes, how they are, pronounced, that can be different from area to area or country to country. And thirdly, the distribution of phonemes can be different. It can be different in, a certain pronunciation for a given word. Also, there can be differences of stress and intonation when speakers from different parts of the world use English language. So if we focus on what Kachro has called the outer circle of the varieties of English, where it is used as a foreign language, he says, we would find that there are varieties of, pronunciations that are different from the standard RP variety, the standard British variety. And even they do not match the general American variety, by the way. The number of phonemes is much more reduced, and in many varieties of English in the outer circle where it is used as a foreign language, there is no difference between long and short vowels. Here on the screen, I would show you some examples. In one common form of Nigerian English, for example, there is only one phoneme corresponding for this. RP is the name for the standard British pronunciation. But in standard British pronunciation, there are two sounds, this one and this one. This one is E and this one is E, like bid and bead. But in this Nigerian English, you would find only one sound, that is bid, that is used for both the words. So bead would also be pronounced as bid and bid would also be pronounced as bid. Also, same is the case for these two sounds, that in RP, in the standard British pronunciation, are like a and a. Hat, this a, and heart, this. But in Nigerian pronunciation, heart and hat, both are pronounced as hat. So, heart would also be pronounced as hat. Instead of a would be pronounced. The third example from same, Nigerian English is of these three sounds, a, and o, in the words stock, stuck, and stalk. But they are all pronounced as stock, in Nigerian English. And there is furthermore the fourth example in Nigerian English of where only one sound is used for this u and u, for look and luke. But in Nigerian English, both would be like look. So, what you need to notice is that these varieties exist divergently from country to country, community to community. There are variations in pronunciation. As far as grammar is concerned, there are only minor grammatical differences between the main standard form and the local varieties if we compare it with the phonology. However, grammatical differences do exist. Here on the slide, you can see an example. American English differs from British English, but the differences are minor. Amongst, for example, past tenses of verbs, some American English has the forms like, dive, dove, fit, snuck. Whereas you compare these forms with the British English forms, instead of dove, dive is used. Instead of second form or third form as fit, fitted is used. And instead of snuck for the second or third form of sneak, sneaked is used in British English. So, the verb forms vary. Also, in a number of forms, the use of ed in American English is found where British English has et. So, burned, learned, spelled, this use of ed. If you compare it with British English, that would be burnt, learnt, and spelled. In some verbs of this letter type, British English changes the stem vowel E to in the past tense. For example, kneeled and, leaped that we find in American English, they are not used in, British English like that. And American often uses do have, where a Briton is more likely to use have got. So, for example, do you have the time? Whereas have you got the time? Look at these differences that we find in the grammar or in the syntax. These differences are also found in vocabulary, and divergently we can see that different varieties of vocabulary are used in different areas. And in fact, vocabulary is probably the area of language where we find these divergences as the greatest. Expanding across the vast North American continent with new flora and fauna and different natural features from those of Europe, and building up a new society, I would say all these factors have contributed towards a divergent, a horizontal spread of English across the world.